What's the password here? You must know what it is,
It
Linda.
should automatically connect. Mine does.
Oh, I don't like to hear that, though.
I'm in here all the time with HTC, so it's automatically.
That means it's open.
Yeah. Now I need Winter to come.
Peter Brace
Right,
is here. Why isn't Peter Brace here?
Nantucket dash guest. That should connect automatically. It's an open.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. It's 5 o'clock. Welcome to the Thursday, June 27th, 2024 Nantucket Conservation Commission hybrid meeting. And the first item on the agenda, public hearing, discussion of revision and potential adoption of the Town of Nantucket Wetland Protection Regulations. And Jeff?
Sure.
Thank you.
All right, so we gave this presentation last night, but it's something that you guys asked for as kind of a summary for everybody involved, so I'm just going to move it over. Hopefully Charles doesn't yell at me from NCTV, but can I get this right? All right, good news. So this is just kind of a summary of changes that are going on. Again, it's not overly detailed. All that stuff was posted. This is just more of a continuation of that. So real quickly, we're allowed to create these regulations from the Code of the Town of Nantucket, which is the bylaw that was approved. The current regulatory structure and the way it's going forward, there are 5 main articles that are broken into sections. One that's more procedural, going back. One that's more procedural, then some appendices to clear things up. We've obviously looked at fees. Where did my presentation go? All right, thank you. Sorry about that. Oh, see, he had to share my screen. See, Charles is smarter than me about this. So we looked at fees. We updated taxonomy of things. These have been reviewed by town council multiple times over the last 4 to 5 years that this has kind of been going on and off. The summary we're about to look at, I didn't break out grammatical or numbering things because there were a lot of those. And one of the big changes overall was that resiliency was added as a protected interest to all of them. So I'll let Charles finish fixing my screen. If I mess something up, Charles, I can close the presentation and start it again. All right. So real quickly, looking at Article 1, again, this is the general provisions and definitions. Within there are 5 separate sections. The severability, number 4, the applicability, number 5, and then the introduction and purpose. We did not make any changes, or there aren't any changes proposed to those sections. We did in procedures and definitions, so I'll run through those briefly. Within definitions, I'm just going to do a little slide to the side. These are the definitions that we added or made revisions to. So just really briefly, things like climate change, coastal resiliency plan, coastal resilience, coastal risk areas, compatible materials, great pond, high tide flooding, normal maintenance, resiliency, sea level rise, were not definitions that were in previously, so those are all new. The rest of those were added or changed, kind of to highlight 2 of the larger ones. We included this one, minimum wetland size, and this is to pick up those sites where we're dealing with those wetlands that are under 500 square feet. As a quick reminder to everybody, the state minimum is 5,000 square feet. 5,000 square feet on Nantucket's actually a pretty large wetland for us. Currently, our regulations, anything of any size, as long as it exhibits hydric soils, hydric vegetation, or one of the other indicators of hydrology, whether it's things like oxidized rhizospheres or water staining. There's no minimum size, so technically any area that exhibits those 3 things are jurisdictional. It's kind of created some problems over time, so this is something that we've put together to look at those areas that are small, kind of in summary for everybody. Anything that's under 500 square feet, there's no buffer zone requirement. And to maintain the function of that area, You still need to maintain it on the lot, but you can kind of move it around and work it around whatever project area is going to be. And things like, excuse me, bioretention areas are allowed to pick up this area to provide that water filtration that the natural system may have produced. In structure, we've added the highlighted language for the primarily of impervious surfaces. We've added a clarity that swimming pool equipment is also structural, not just swimming pools. That's a question that's come up in the past. And then dry laid stone patios have moved from being non-structural to structural under the new proposal. Under procedures, we've added a couple different new procedures. One is this local conservation plan. It's really to allow some of the larger properties that are looking at kind of a long-term management strategy, something like large-scale invasive species management, long-term wetland restoration. I think a project like the windswept bogs that we've just been permitting with NCF is a good example of this, where it's kind of a longer planning set, is it allows someone to work with the commission to kind of set up what that overall plan would look like, and still have to do regular permitting, but at least to know that over the next 10 years that expectations are set for what's kind of coming in, and hopefully it could be a useful planning tool for the town and land bank and NCF and some of our larger property owners. Another one, minor activities. The state in their act has minor activities as well. We've kind of tailored a Nantucket list, and instead of going through the full hearing process, those are things that can allow for staff approval. Just some examples of those include things like installation of split rail fence outside of the 25-foot buffer zone, conversion of lawn to natural vegetation, some utility installations, but smaller scale projects that are minor. And then we've also included and drafted up new waiver criteria, again, targeting some of the larger scale projects for an overwhelming public benefit to be part of the consideration for some of the larger projects, especially when we start looking at some of the large scale resiliency projects that are going to be coming forward in the next 5 to 10 years. I apologize for this being really small. I know it's hard to see on the screen up there, but these are the new fees that are proposed. We're proposing switching to a fee structure more comparable to how the state does it with categories. We actually match their categories criteria for criteria, so it should be fairly easy. And then some other changes. We hadn't adjusted fees. We kind of looked back. The last time we adjusted any fees was in kind of the mid 2000s, and then a couple minor tweaks in 2013. We tried to make these kind of comparable not only to other municipalities within Massachusetts, but also kind of comparable to time, energy, and effort spent reviewing applications and doing site visits where a local fee of $25 is not really covering much time anymore. But to make it more reflective of effort involved, and then also to have some scalability with some of these new things like minor mods and minor activity requests. So turn into the meat and potatoes of the changes. For anyone that's new to the process, just to run through really quickly a quick overview. The commission has identified, and the state act identifies as well, a number of resource areas. Those resource areas are defined in their characteristics. And part of that, and then they're each have their own performance standards, which are essentially the rules for doing work or activities in those, and the performance standards you have to meet. So I've only shown the ones that we've made changes to, kind of in summary. Again, all of the stuff was posted, so hopefully people could see it. But to run through quickly, under land under the ocean, we included some information regarding eelgrass specifically within its definition and kind of the importance of eelgrass and its function, but no other changes to land under the ocean. Coastal beach, we updated some performance standards. One that's also, you'll see on coastal bank, related to work on coastal engineering structures, requiring alternative analysis as part of that performance standard to justify that work on a coastal engineering structure. And then also this new performance standard where instead of just using the erosion rates that we had been, is evaluating the short-term and long-term erosion rates and then requiring any mitigation to be based on whichever is the higher rate of the two. And then I know probably the more questions we've gotten about is this buffer zone change and proposal. that we'll do on a separate slide. We have a graphic for that, so you'll see that updated buffer zone, see separate slide a lot as we go through this because it's on most of the resource areas, and we'll cover that at the end. So coastal dune is the buffer zone. Barrier beach, there's no changes. Just as a reminder for everyone, barrier beaches don't allow any new development by state act and by local bylaw. So there's no changes there. There's no real buffer zone requirements in there as well. You're either in it or you're not. Coastal bank, kind of that same change as coastal beach and then the buffer zone. Salt marsh, buffer zone again, and then we added this new performance standard number 10 to allow and permit for salt marsh restoration. That was kind of a proposal that came out of the coastal resiliency plan where they're encouraging not only salt marsh migration, but trying to restore those areas to create a greater coastal area buffer zone from our inland areas using salt marshes. Salt pond obviously has the buffer zone slide. Fish runs, no changes. Land subject to coastal storm flowage. The other name that often that gets called, that's just the flood zone. So that's the map FEMA flood areas. There's a new proposal restricting on building within high tide flooding areas. It's just a restriction where in those areas that flood during high tide, a prohibition on that building. Again, that was part of a recommendation from the Coastal Resiliency Plan. And then number 5, this was debated quite a lot for a period of time where there was discussion amongst the commission, just as a reminder of whether pools should be allowed, period, in the flood zone or not. And I think after some applications that came in and discussion, you guys are putting forward that the surface elevation of the pool needs to be above the elevation of any floodwaters. Estimated habitat, there are no changes. Moving on to the next section, which is inland resource areas. So they're with inland banks and beaches. It's the buffer zone again. Bordering vegetated wetland as the same buffer zone. And then there used to be a strict 2-foot separation to structures within there without any further guidance. And I think the commission was efforting to provide some further clarity on how to not just establish that by definition, but also how to operate within that. And we can always put that on the screen if people need to see that later. Inland water bodies, the same buffer zone. And then we attempted to make a graphic to hopefully try to explain this a little bit better for everybody. And we have gotten a few questions even in the last day about this. So I'll try to walk through this. Will, if I make hash of this again like I did last night, you can save me again. But just to run through really quickly, so at the top of the graphic is the resource area. So in this case, in our example, it could be a bordering vegetated wetland, could be a coastal bank, could be a coastal beach. So from there, there's a 25-foot no disturb buffer zone, which is still compliant to the existing regulations that has that same no disturb buffer zone for 25 feet. And then moving out to the 50-foot buffer zone, currently bordering vegetated wetland is the only one that allows, it has this 50% disturbance allowed provision that's being extended to the other ones. So that area between 25 and 50, there's a 50% non-structural disturbance allowed by permit. And then this is where kind of the significant change is being made. So I'll jump down one box. New structures are permitted without any further work or effort, but with a permit from the 75 out to the 100. Obviously, anything that goes beyond the 100-foot buffer zone is outside of jurisdiction and it doesn't require permits in this case. But then this area between the 50 and 75, you may still put structures, and any structural area within that area can go in. But in the area moving out from the 25, you have to offset that by 1.5 times. So in this example, if you have 1,000 square feet of structure within that 50 to 75, in the area between the 25 and 50, and it can extend beyond the 50 and however people would like, there would need to be 1,500 feet of additional buffer zone either maintained or created to help protect that resource area from there. Does that make sense to this group, or I can stay up there. I'm sure people may have questions when we get to public comment, and we can put this back up. But that's the intent, is we do it a bit to, I hate to say memorialize the horse trade, but to make it a little bit more valid. But also, I think from the discussion of the commission originally, it was to provide larger buffer zone, but in a way that folks have the ability to manipulate that on their own property, how they see fit, and make the choice and trade-off between structure and development and buffer zone area. And as long as that enhancement or maintenance area connects to the original 25-foot buffer zone, it can extend up property lines or across the back. It could be really in any shape or configuration. So that was the kind of final language of that's in the current text. There is one more new local only resource area. There's not a resource area like this in the State Act. But essentially what it is this Great Pond area. And from the edge of the Great Pond, so our Great Ponds on the island are Hummock, Long, Sacajah, Myacomet, Gibbs, and Tom Nevers Pond. There would be a 200-foot buffer zone from there. And obviously any work that's within that 100-foot buffer zone would require a normal permit, so a notice of intent, request for determination. But the area between 100 and 200 for work in that area qualifies as a minor activity request, with the goal of that to try to maintain some natural habitat linkages between those areas and the Great Ponds that are utilized by so many species for breeding areas or feeding areas, but to try to keep some corridors in place for wildlife and for plants to move. Into the new articles, so Article 4, activities in the buffer zone, there's no changes in that. That's the section that includes things like invasive species management in specific. There were no changes in that at this time that are proposed. Appendix A is the Article 68 work group fertilizer best management practices that the commission adopted into the regulations a number of years ago. That document hasn't changed, so there are no changes there. Appendix B, the invasive species list. We used to have an actual text list of invasive species. Those lists change from time to time and can kind of change year to year. So what we've provided instead now is just links to the official sources, whether it's the state invasive species list or some of the invasive species plants groups. I think our local biodiversity initiative has a link up there, but just connecting people to those resources instead of us trying to have to keep up with any list or list changes. And then 2 new appendices that we haven't had prior. One of them is Appendix C, which is the swimming pool guidelines. It supplements our existing town's illicit discharge regulations, which the select board adopted about a year ago now. And it's really focused on proper management of swimming pools where, making sure things are dechlorinated before any draining, that we're not draining into resource areas, that they're going to upland areas. But it's more of a how to manage pools in our sensitive areas. And then Appendix D is something that we've been asked for a long time, and clarity on this is a viewshed management appendix, and it's really focused on the different layers of vegetation that we see worked on, whether they're trees, shrubs, or ground cover, but creating some guidance for how to do those where you're not having a potential negative impact while still allowing for viewshed maintenance. Obviously, wetland scenic views is a interest that's protected by the bylaw. People like to be able to see. And I think Will would back me up on this. Over time, we get a lot of calls from folks that are, areas get clear cut or things happen or things change. It's really trying to show people, hey, there's a right way to do it. There's a wrong way to do it. We'll encourage you to do it the correct way. Here's the standards we have. But hopefully we can find some success in that, and we're not chasing around violations. We'd rather chase around folks that are successfully maintaining their views. And with that, that's a really great one. This was a slide I added for the presentation last night for the select board. So if you're here, you already know all these things because you're here. And that's it. I think I'm happy to turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
So thank you very much, Jeff. And when you say that's it, that's an awful lot of work that has gone into this from staff, commission members, members of the public, thank you all. And do commissioners have any further comments or observations to make before I ask members of the public if they'd like to weigh in?
You can't raise our little yellow hand.
No. You're gonna just- It's like this, garçon. Would you like to, do you have anything to add, Linda?
Well, the yellow head. Oh, yeah. I've never been told that I have to raise my voice further. I've had concerns, as you know, and broken record on it. I appreciate the change or the codification of it so everybody could get this. I did send it out so people had it. I also asked Will to give me the beginning, the middle, and the end. And I believe Jeff Blackwell sent something in here. I forgot how to get out of this screen. That brought up a very interesting issue. I believe the Board of Health added some sort of a caveat. I sent it to you guys. And do you want to read what he said? Because if I lose this screen, I think I lose my ability to see that, because I can't read it from up there. Actually, I have it somewhere. It's too much modern technology. Because it sort of addressed some of my concerns that he brought up from a legal standpoint. I think it's right here. I'll read it to you. When the Board of Health adopted their well regulations in 1990 and updated them in 1124, they included a section defining waivers for lots vacant or developed in existence in 1990 that are not able to meet the new regulation. The concept and phrase maximum feasible compliance was included in the BOH regs. If BOH maximum feasible compliance is demonstrated, a waiver is granted for the remaining nonconformity. He said it's important the new Concom regs recognize pre-existing vacant lots. That was one of my concerns. If the usual Concom waiver standards are applied without consideration of pre-existing status, they're going to be currently viable vacant lots that would be rendered unbuildable. It'd be a bit complicated to create the language, but I'm sure Jeff and a couple of the usual suspects, quote unquote, could cook it up. So that, if we addressed it somehow, the pre-existing, the waiver situation, the impact of the 75-foot, are we gaining an awful lot with the extra 25 feet? Because I was reading Dan Malloy's thing as well, and that seems to be a constant refrain in his comments about what are we gaining with the extra 25 feet on Nantucket as opposed to anywhere else in the country. We're sort of a unique situation. So that's been my concern all along, is the actual impact. And several people have asked me why we researched the impact. Do we know how many lots are going to be impacted? I think if we did something along the lines of what the Board of Health did, crafted the language that would be more appropriate for the Concom regs, I'd be more comfortable with it. But I've had this concern right from the beginning, as you know. So that's where I am at the moment with that. The rest of the regulations, I think, are probably long overdue. I know there are some concerns with the expansion to 200 feet. I have heard that. So I think those comments are going to come from the audience, but I'm still focused on just this one section and how do we deal with it, considering the existing situations that people have and rendering lots unbuildable, which I don't think is, it's like a tantamount to a taking. But I think some of the attorneys here and some of the surveyors will speak to that. So that's just where I am at the moment. But I appreciate all the work and the time that everybody, including the chairman, has put into this.
Thank you, Linda. Jeff, do you want to comment at all? Or?
Sure, I can wait.
Okay.
I can, or I can wait and we can see if there's more consistent comments that come with that and respond to them all at once.
All right. Thank you, Linda. Any other observations from? Thank you.
We do have a yellow hand.
So Seth and then Mike, if you don't mind. Seth, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and hi, everybody. And sorry I can't be with you in person today. My nana died, and I had to go off island for the funeral, but otherwise I would have been there. I want to speak specifically to the Great Pond area because Linda brought that up, and I was the person who kind of advocated to have this included. So the 200-foot buffer zone to the Great Pond area isn't so much of, I mean, it's in the regulations, but it's more meant to be an educational opportunity. Our ability to put strict permitting requirements into place between the 100-foot and 200-foot is limited anyway, based on our bylaw. But it's just meant to be an opportunity for if you're applying to do something within the area, then you have to put this minor activity permit into place and talk with the staff who's going to encourage you to craft the project in a way that helps create these natural habitat linkages. But it's not really as stringent of a buffer zone as all the other buffer zones we're talking about. So I don't think we're overstepping any jurisdictional authority there. I think it's actually an opportunity to encourage wildlife corridors and riparian linkages to the Great Pond. So thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking forward to hearing public comment from everybody as well. So thanks for showing up, everybody. One of my concerns going forward is the timing of the implementation. Several people have spoken to me since we've been focusing on the regulations over the past couple of weeks, and I'm concerned for some year-round people or some not even year-round, but families who are relying on doing something with their lots if they have to make a change before the regs go into effect, which would be the first of the year. And given the volume that we may see, I was hoping that we could consider extending that out for a full year from this period. But we'll wait to hear what everybody's got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. All right. So from members, yes, Mr. Beal.
Thank you. This question is probably for Jeff. I would have think that on the unbuildable lot issue or challenge lot issue that makes it difficult to develop, don't we have waiver abilities for certain lots that are making it difficult to develop if we can find a suitable alternative, or not alternative, so suitable,
Sure. I think I understand your question as it relates to the buffer zone. So I'll try to tackle Linda's comment a little bit at the same time. So the way it's currently written, it also includes kind of a separate provision already that's in there that if you're a structure that exists now, if you come in and you need to do work on the structure, you want to expand the structure, the only area that's subject to buffer zone enhancement is new. It's not on the existing structure. So if your structure is already down at the 50-foot setback, if you want to add on to that structure, you're only asked to mitigate anything that's new. So that was put in by the commission to kind of deal with that situation. As for the other situation where it's a completely undeveloped lot currently, the only thing that's really changing from the old standards to the new is you're still able, with a permit, to build that structure down to the 50. But in the area that's between the 25 and 50, you'll be restricted or you'll need to provide that buffer zone compensation. So that's a decision that's there. I know there are some lots, and we've looked at some examples just to try to play this out as this has been getting drafted, where those buffer zones may not be available on lots. And we see that from time to time where there's not 25-foot undisturbed buffer zone that's there. The existing waiver criteria that are in place, whether it's no adverse impact, no reasonable alternative, net benefit, there's the waiver provision that's if the resource area is separated from where you're doing your activity by an area outside of your control, you can qualify. There's also kind of the pre-existing, I know we've been efforting to be removing grandfathering as wording from it, and I always mess up what the new wording is supposed to be in the Commonwealth. So pre-existing for some is the other waiver criteria, and then there's the new one, obviously, that doesn't really apply. But you would still be eligible, on a case-by-case basis to apply for a waiver from any performance standard. That isn't changing at all. So hopefully that answers that a little bit. I mean, this is, again, kind of a concept that's been floating around for like 4 years and been discussed in varying times. So playing catch up for everybody can always be kind of tricky.
So thank you, Jeff. And Linda, does that answer some of your concerns?
Would the performance standards be changed, or are we operating pretty much as we have with this buffer zone increase? Are we?
So currently, the way that the performance standard reads is, just to use the standard one, is it's still a 25-foot no disturb buffer zone. So that, again, is remaining unchanged from what we are currently doing. Bordering vegetated wetland only allows disturbance of 50% of the area between the 25 and 50 for non-structural disturbance. That would be applied to all resource areas under the new proposal, not just bordering vegetated wetland. And structures are allowed down to the 50 under the current regulations without a waiver. The new proposal is suggesting that new structures be allowed without a waiver or additional work from the 75 out. And if you want to put your structure down at the 50-foot still, you may do so. You just have to offset that area by enhancing the undisturbed zone and making that larger to compensate for that disturbance. Yep.
Absolutely.
If you're presented with a situation where you can't mitigate, or you are not the ability to enhance on your property, is there a provision that allows you to contribute to enhancement on town property, land bank property, someplace else?
We haven't gone into like doing that financially. I think from the discussion, and again, I don't want to try to project on the commission's discussion, and I think when we've tried to play scenarios out in our head from a staff wise, that would be a situation where you would be asking for a waiver from that performance standard, and justifying that waiver, whether it, again, it's, I think in those cases, you'd either be looking at, area outside of your control, or no adverse impact, no reasonable alternative that allows the project to proceed in compliance with the regulations, is how that one reads. Or you may be able to also find other net benefit to, keeping undisturbed areas on your lot. They may not be contiguous, but I think that's something that, I think we've all seen over time, that every lot is a little bit unique, and presents its own, kind of quirks and challenges, that I think that's what the hearing process is for, is to evaluate that and evaluate that waiver criteria. But I think it also gives some clear guidance to folks for how they can, design their project to be successful.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Linda. So I think we all feel we're not trying to stop people from building on their lots. We're just trying to increase the protection where possible of the resources that we're charged to protect. And as Jeff said, in situations where that proves to be not feasible, then there is always the waiver process. So, sorry? Seth, unfortunately, I don't have eyes in the back of my head, so please go ahead.
Maybe next year I'll get some. So I want to speak specifically to Linda's question about the offsite mitigation because this is a question I've had many times, and um, I've looked into the regulations and asked DEP about this. And offsite mitigation, although it exists for some other permitting systems in the Commonwealth, such as like the NHESP, is not allowed through the Wetlands Protection Act. The way the wetlands regulations are written, all mitigation activities are required to be on site. So I think what you're suggesting, Linda, in theory is great, but we don't have the ability to create a regulatory system that says that, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. So, who would like to step up to the microphone from members of the public? Please do so and identify yourself. Good afternoon, Mr. Cohen.
I'd like to thank the Commission for the lot of effort that it's put into these rules. I think some of them are highly beneficial. I have two relatively specific questions or comments. On the addition of the dry laid patios, I would question whether or not that's really providing a benefit compared to the impact it has. I would request that the Commission consider deleting that language from the addition of structure. I'm not sure. I think it's really something that allows people to enjoy their outdoor space, and I'm not sure it's really having an impact on the wetland. And frankly, I don't think it's going to stop them from doing the same activity in the same location anyway. So that's one comment. The second comment is on the 75-foot rule. I think that I'm not sure that there's really any benefit to going from 50 feet to 70 feet or a significant benefit, but I do think that the proposal on the table is one that creates an enhancement rather than a burden, which I know is a conversation that we had before. So I'm glad to see that at least if the Commission adopts something, that it's going in that direction instead of a prohibition. But I have a sort of a technical question for Jeff, or through you, Mr. Chair, which is that in the way it's written, would it allow you to restrict an area as opposed to requiring you to revegetate an area? In other words, would both of those be allowed? Because I think it's important not to incentivize a disturbance to create the horse trade.
I think the way that we've always understood it is that if you're maintaining an already undisturbed area,
Yeah.
that if it's between the correct areas, that it would count against that area. So I think I was super confusing the way I said that, but I think there would always be a preference to already existing natural areas over fixing a disturbed area.
Okay. I mean, frankly, as long as both are allowed, I think
Correct.
it would be good. I just didn't want to be in a position where you're requiring a give back that would require people to disturb it and then give it back.
No, I think, again, minimal disturbance. So if it's already in existence,
Yeah.
that would be the preferred option.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I respond?
Yes, please do.
Thank you. And I would like to respond to both of Mr. Cohen's points. The second one first, though. So I think that I agree wholeheartedly that the restriction on an area that's currently not developed would fall into that mitigation requirement. But I think the commission would be wise to, require applicants on plans to specifically delineate those areas so it's memorialized, and then probably to include in our orders of condition permanent marking of those areas so it doesn't go away later. But I think that's easy to do and similar to things that we already do through the commission. And then in relation to the dry laid stone patios, this was one of the topics that I believe had the most discussion other than the buffer zone requirement. Maybe some of the pool stuff. I think the patios was next. And the whole justification was that although dry laid stone patios are permeable in theory, how a lot of dry laid stone patios are actually created on a lot, there tends to be limited spacing between the pavers, and there tends to be a compaction over time of the patio and the gaps between those patios that significantly reduces the permeability over time. So it ends up being much more or much less permeable than, let's say, a grass lawn or a gravel pit lot or something like that. So the whole point of this is to allow for better infiltration and recharge, and not have runoff being directed or accelerated toward the resource areas. It's not to prohibit people from doing outdoor activities. And no one say you can't have a lawn with chairs at it or fire pits or whatever you want. It's really specifically to improve the recharge ability of the site. So thank you.
Thank you, Seth. And Steve, does that answer your question?
It does, and actually, it was a very good answer, and I think what I would say is, Seth's answer is a very good answer, and I would suggest that instead of creating a band through the definition of a structure, that would be better to require permeability through drainage or spacing or whatever. I think that if the point is to create drainage, you can do that without prohibition. And I would encourage the commission to look at that point. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Cohen, would you like to identify yourself? Can you hear me? So, Ms. Cohen?
Sorry. Can you hear me?
Hi. We can hear you,
Thank you.
I think, yes.
Okay. Could I ask that I share my screen? Would that be possible?
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, I shouldn't say sure so quickly, but
Yeah.
we'll find out if it's technically possible. You got nothing? Okay. So, Ms. Cohen, do you have a point to make without your
I sure do.
screen being shared?
Yes, my name is Amy Ford Cohane. Hello. My husband and I own and live at 76 Union Street. We are grateful to the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee and the Conservation Commission for all the rigorous work done on the proposed updates to the wetlands regulations. While we wish they had happened sooner and we wish they were bolder, they are, to echo Burton Balkind, a crucial step in modernizing Nantucket's regulatory framework to harmonize with the latest scientific understanding of climate change and the sea level rise, and we urge you to adopt these updates without delay. We're direct abutter to the Mariner Way development. The properties in this development originally filled tidelands are adjacent to fragile wetlands, the harbor and the Goose Pond. Can you hear me still?
We can. We'd like to stay on topic, please, on the regulation update. Right,
Yeah, we can't
Yeah.
take site-specific information.
right.
It needs to be general.
So, thank you for your observations. And yes, sir.
Did you hear me close? I just said, thank you very much. These couldn't be passed soon enough in our opinion, given our standing in this situation, and thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Ms. Cohen, and thank you for speaking. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Gary Beller. I'm here wearing, I have kind of three hats, but I'm really speaking for myself. I'm a member of the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Commission, and I know Peter's here, and I assume he'll speak for the commission. I cannot, but we certainly have sent a few letters to the commission urging you to finalize these improvements and modernization of our rules. I'm personally urging you to do that because we think it's time enough has been spent. You've been debating this for over 2.5 years. So the public is well on notice, and whether Mike's suggestion is something you prefer, whether it's 6 months from now or something like that. When they change tax laws, the date that the laws are offered is the day that they implement, even if they're not passed until 6 or 8 or 9 months later. But I think our public has certainly had quite an opportunity to understand that these rules are changing, especially the ones that people are concerned about in the buffer zone. So that's one of my hats. The second hat I have, I'm a member of the Advisory Committee of Non-Voting Taxpayers, I have been chairman for several years, no longer chairman, but I'm still a member. And the good news is that although we haven't taken a formal vote on it, we are in favor of upgrading these regulations. The good news is that Mother Nature doesn't discriminate against resident taxpayers and non-resident taxpayers when the sea levels are rising and when storms are coming in. So we don't have any special issues on that. We just believe it's good to keep these regulations updated. And my third hat is I'm a resident of Brant Point, and we've been there for many years, much more than a decade, almost 2 decades. And I watch with dismay so many ill-considered developments that have sprung up. I even came to this meeting when the Brant was being done. I watched them putting in a pool in an area that I know I've seen flood over all the time. But when I raised the issue here, I was just told that, sorry, the regulations do not prevent us from making those decisions. And of course, I saw what happened this January in our neighborhood when the Easton Street and Willard and Walsh, we were all completely flooded. And I'm thinking about all those new homes there, some of whom are putting in pools. So once again, as a Brant Point resident, I urge you, let's get this done. The sooner the better. It's taken a few years, but I congratulate you on all of the time you have spent listening to the public. They've really come out, I know, on many of these meetings, and I think you've paid attention. You've gone a little easier than I might have gone, but I think you've made some good compromises, and that's how you have to do things, especially in Nantucket. So once again, I urge you to approve this thing, get it going. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Peter, you look as though you're ready at the starting gate.
High enough? Can you hear me?
Yes, if you'd identify yourself, please.
Okay, I'm Peter Brace. I'm the chairman of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee, and I wish to read into the record our most recent letter commenting on these regulations, February 14th, 2024. With this letter, the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is informing the Conservation Commission of its unanimous support for the Commission's proposed amendment to the Nantucket Wetlands Bylaw with regards to the buffer zones and setbacks, including the 50% no disturb between 25% buffer zone, between the 25-foot buffer zone and the 50-foot setback, the development of a 75-foot buffer zone for structures, and the flexibility and the enhancing of a buffer zone by allowing structures down to the 50-foot setback with undisturbed buffer zone enhancement. This expansion recognizes the changes to coastal resource areas anticipated to be impacted by climate change. Coastal resources, including salt marshes, coastal ponds, and dunes will be impacted by sea level rise and erosion. Increased buffer areas will help these coastal areas adapt to change. Additionally, expanding this protection to inland resource areas will allow protection for wetland areas that may expand through rising groundwater and increased precipitation. That's my word. Precipitation and anticipated through climate change. The CRAC is well aware of how salt marshes lining the shores of Nantucket's harbors, tidal creeks and salt ponds, as well as freshwater wetlands along the edges of coastal or outwash ponds that have been identified as storm pathways on the island's south shore are being and will continue to be inundated by sea level rise. These areas, governed by the local Nantucket Wetlands Bylaw as vegetated wetlands, are expected to be impacted by sea level rise and other climate change impacts, and in many cases, the vegetated wetland edge may expand. Because Nantucket is at a critical point in the area in the era of climate change-driven sea level rise, we believe that doubling the current no-impact wetlands buffer zone is prudent and necessary amendment to the Nantucket Wetlands Bylaw. Further, the CRAC recommends that the Conservation Commission be aware that these buffer zones are likely to require shifting inland much sooner than the Conservation Commission may be anticipating as the ocean continues to rise. In light of this, we recommend that the Conservation Commission continue to rely on its current procedures of updated wetland delineations that will help identify these changes in buffer zones to adapt as needed to rising water levels along the shores of our island coastline and great ponds where applicable. Our committee thanks the Conservation Commission for allowing the CRAC the time to get our comments to you.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you in turn to your committee for supporting us and doing the work that you've been doing on this subject. So, yes, ma'am.
Hello. My name is Ann Duez. I live at 5 Mill Street. Last night at the Select Board meeting, after Jeff gave his fine presentation, the chair asked members of the Select Board to weigh in, ask questions, make comments. 2 members weighed in, Member Fee with a technical question about buffer zones, and Member Holgate with 3 questions. The first of which was about what study they may have done, staff, about other communities who had, to see if they had, and I quote, undertaken this level of restriction. Mr. Carlson answered the questions in reverse order. He did not address the first question directly, but did so by making several references in his answers to the third and second questions about best practices in other communities. But I was actually bemused by the question itself. Why would we care what other communities do, and if what they do is more or less restrictive than what we do? The proposal before you is for Nantucket, the result of years of study and debate about what is best for our particularly fragile environment that is at such risk from climate change and development being the 2 most serious. The proposed regulations before you are right for Nantucket. I urge all 6 of you who have yet to declare a position, one has already declared opposition, to first of all resist any effort tonight to further delay your vote. This has been going on for years. I also urge you in the strongest possible way to do the right thing and accept these regulations tonight because they are right for Nantucket. I want to thank you all for your work, but I most particularly want to thank Ian for his leadership of this commission, his dedication for 12 years, and to say that we'll miss you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Spruce
you.
has his hand up, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Spruce, would you care to comment?
Burton Balkine, and speaking on behalf of the Nantucket Coastal Conservancy. And I want you to know, Ian, that I really appreciate you and thank you for all the work you've done on the commission over these last 12 years. And speaking on behalf of the Nantucket Coastal Conservancy, support these regulation updates, and would also like to add that at last night's select board meeting, I believe one of the select board members asked about implementation, and I think it was the staff member, Jeff, who mentioned no earlier than probably the beginning of the year. I think that would be a good target date. I think waiting a full another year is delaying for no reason. I think the first of the year is a good demarcation point where where the end of the tax year and other things. I think it would phase in well instead of trying to do it in a year from now in the middle of June. Again, and I also like to thank the commission for their hard work. I've been following along at the meetings and appreciate all the work that you've done as a whole too. So thank you for your time. And I hope this passes tonight.
Thank you, Spruce. So, Linda, do you mind if that gentleman speaks first? So, Mr. Lowell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. It's probably hard to believe, but forgive me for not paying attention. The past 2.5 years have had some distractions, to say the least.
For the record, Andy Lowell.
Yes, Andy Lowell, 5 Ackermuck Way. Your lengthy work on the regulation changes, forgive me for not paying attention so closely to that. So thank you for having this meeting tonight and allowing me the opportunity to speak. I'm going to speak specifically on the 50 to 75-foot issue, not speaking about coastal banks, anything like that. I'm going to use myself as an example, owning a 1-acre lot in half-acre zoning. It's been a family property since '62. It couldn't be more perfectly created with a pond dead center in the middle. Basically what this happens to me here. And I know every situation is unique, every application is unique, but I would like to think there are some other people in the same situation that I am. I've been on your side of this table. I know what it's like. It's not easy. I applaud your work, your commitment. It takes time, volunteer time, and that's certainly admirable. I've felt the desire to make a difference. I still have that desire to make a difference. I think you all know where I stand as far as development goes. When I was appointed to this board in '97, I also authored the building cap at the time. I'd love to have seen development slow down a lot more than it has happened in the past 27 years. I've felt the pressure from opposition, sometimes confrontational, even losing friends. I've believed in the rules, and I've questioned the rules. And I've also have felt what it is like to take away property rights, not only in the moment, but I've also felt it 27 years later. I learned what precedence meant. I never heard the word before 1997, or at least I didn't know what it meant. Am I to be corrected, or is there going to be a 200-foot? Are you extending jurisdiction to 200 feet?
So the jurisdiction on the 200 feet is for basically for minor work around long ponds, and it has nothing to do with buildings per se. In other words, our jurisdiction only extends out to 100, and the no building between the 0 and the 50 still holds, as it's been explained. So, and there's certainly no desire on the part of any of the commissioners, as far as I can tell, to remove property rights. It's all about protecting the wetlands to a greater extent. And that's why, if I mean, I can only speak for myself, which, as you know, I won't be here anymore after the end of the month, but the idea is that the waiver would cover a situation if it actually rendered building impossible.
All right, well, ultimately, for the landowner, it can be seen as property rights, certainly restricted more, ultimately taken away. Maybe that's not the best way to word it, but the jurisdiction to the 200 feet, I'm thrilled with. If we could be site-specific and I could show you my kettle pond in the middle of a 1-acre lot, surrounded by development, watching development take place over the past 25 years that negatively affects me.
So Andy? Yeah. So that was strictly, as I think I made clear, great ponds only. And so it's not a question of limiting building rights in the slightest.
Okay, all right, I stand to be corrected.
Well-
I'll leave that one, let's stricken that from the record then. Thank you. But still, where I was looking at a potential, it seems that that potential is decreased without creating some mitigating circumstances closer to outweigh the negative effects that I may create. But I'm hopeful that within this 100-foot to 200-foot area, we can try to gather more of what comes into a wetland, because it's such a much larger area. When we focus on 25, 50 feet, it's a very small area within that specific property itself. When you get out to 200 feet, I'm watching, specifically what I am watching from development in my neighborhood is litter, silt, fertilizers, all absorbed by my property. Nothing I can do about it. It's coming from their property. Certainly there is something I can do about it, create a moat to catch it around my property, but I don't feel it's, if they're more regulated, how measurable is that in comparison to simply restricting, creating this 50 to 75 foot? Imagine how much you can gather from that 100 to 200 feet, and how much we can gain in protecting wetlands by restricting less fertilizer use. I'm seeing so many houses being built without gutters. Stormwater runoff, roof water runoff is directly coming down raised grades onto neighboring properties. It's kind of tough to watch this all pass by and have your wetland negatively affected in a way that is beyond your control. And we expect the protection from this board, and I'm hoping some more protection is afforded to my property, but at the same time, I hope that in the future, because by putting a grace period of, say, 5 months on this, maybe even a year, I've heard, how about a grace period of 10 years? I have no plans to develop. Every time a new restriction, say we restrict pools, you get a run-on permits for pools. You restrict, a building cap. There's a run-on building permits. So I don't want to run to get a permit to develop my property. I'm hoping my kids can develop that property.
So that is not the purpose of these regulation updates. And I don't know, Jeff, if you can address Andy's concerns any more specifically than I have. It's,
well, Mr.
I sort
Chairman,
of tried to explain that,
I spoke with Jeff. Jeff gave me a half hour today, and I truly
Okay.
appreciate that.
All right.
Since
So-
his day was so busy, and I'm totally understand the mitigating portion of this, and in a way agree with it, but it takes away, in some instances, what somebody may have historically been able to do in that area.
Well, Andy, that is exactly why we have the waiver provision. And I don't think it's the intention of anybody on this commission to take away property rights or building rights per se. It's more a question of trying to protect a diminishing resource and coming up with the best way that we can to protect that diminishing resource without threatening property rights. So I think we've sort of, if you've made your point.
Okay.
All right.
But so waivers, is it common for you to be issuing waivers?
We do issue waivers when necessary.
It seems like something that you wouldn't gamble on in Vegas, but Thank you, Ian. Thank
You're
you
welcome.
for your,
You're welcome,
comment.
Andy.
all your time involved here, and the board as well.
Yes, please do. So, Will?
How does this work? I know how to use Zoom, not real life. Sorry, guys. Just real quick, I think as staff, we have had this in our head quite a bit. The regulations are changing. Everybody is used to kind of how waivers have been with our current regulations, and I think that there's a lot of fear out there. But with changing regulations, I think that there's also going to be big changes in how waivers are looked at. The waivers apply to the new proposed buffer zone changes extremely well. And I think that we're going to see more situations that at the discretion of whatever our commission looks like in any given decade, I truly believe that things are going to look a little bit different. You know,
Thank
not
you,
much
Will.
to back that up, but that's how I see it.
Thank you, Will. And Seth, forgive me again, please go ahead.
No worries. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I know people are concerned about trying to have every project be a waivered project, and I think that's valid from the public, and I think that's valid from the commission's standpoint too. You know, if we're putting in such restrictive regulations that they're impossible to meet and every single project is applying for a waiver, then we did the regulation wrong. But here's the thing about the regulations. Although they haven't been updated in over 10 years, we as this current commission, I guess we can't speak for the future, but in addition to this regulatory update, we have already committed to doing significantly more updates on a more frequent annual basis because we do want to be responsive to what's happening. So people think of regulations as etched in stone, but they're written in graphite or typed with computer ink at this point. And if there are regulations that end up not making sense and not working in this new permitting system, we're going to realize it and we're going to change them. The other thing is, you know, I would say we do issue waivers on a regular basis. I'm sure Will or Jeff would be happy to have you go into the office and look through past permitting history if you're so inclined, and you can see which permits are being issued waivers and which are not. And I know the staff on many occasions has also said that anytime somebody is hoping to apply for a permit, before you even get started, you can go to the staff to have a discussion, a pre-permit discussion about whether any waivers would even be possible on your site. So we can't necessarily constrain the efforts or opinions of new commissioners or future commissions, but we are creating a permitting system that's flexible enough to deal with cases that maybe don't work exactly right with the requirement, like Mr. Lowe is talking about or anyone else is talking about. The point of this is to enhance buffer zones while retaining flexibility for a better protection of the wetland resource areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. And I think that's very well expressed. And Linda?
I don't think anybody could have said what our objective is any better than what Seth just said. I think what Steve said about the patio thing might be a good idea. That's permeable as opposed to what we're normally seeing is very hard joints. But also a comment was made earlier that I was opposed to something, which was a misnomer and shouldn't have been quoted that way. I've been concerned about the impact of the 50 to 75. I've become less concerned as we've had more discussions about it, and we've changed the original one because I have all three of them here. And I'm more less concerned because of the good discussion we've had about the waiver process and everything else, and making it much clearer to the public as to what the issue is. We're not saying too bad, so sad, can't do anything inside the 75. And that's the way it came across, several months ago when a year ago when we brought this up. People are going, oh my God, 75 feet, forget it. Can't move, can't expand, can't build, can't do anything. So I think as we go through this public hearing and explain more about what our objective is and the waiver process, I think people are going to become much more comfortable with it. But as you know, I haven't said I was opposed categorically. I was concerned about the impact, concerned about black and white, and I think we're becoming less black and white. We're becoming more gray. So let's get it clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Yes, sir.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Henry Mueller. I live at 11 North Mill Street, summer resident. I've been on the island for 65 plus years. I am completely in favor of what you are considering tonight. I think there are times where you got to put a marker down. And in a period of great change and natural change, climate change and so on and so forth, got to put a marker down and step forward, make the necessary changes. Being relatively new to this issue, you can only follow it to some extent from off island, but doing a little bit of studying in the last few weeks that I've been here and then listening tonight, the thing that jumps out at me is the robustness of the waiver process, both previous and what it sounds like it will be in this new regime. So I urge you strongly, get on with it, adopt these changes, and move forward. And the last point about timing, there's never good timing. There's never good timing for a change like this. January 1st is pretty tolerant. And as Mr. Beller said about tax laws, never got any forbearance on tax laws. January 1st, let's go. Make the changes. Use that waiver process. I think this can work. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So on that note.
Mr. Chair, just one.
Do we,
Okay.
Seth has his hand up?
Yeah, just quickly.
I think we have some more in the audience as well.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do want to talk just quickly on the patio thing again. And Linda, I hear what you're saying, and Mr. Cohen, I hear what you're saying as well. And some of these conversations, I think, are several years old now. But we did have these discussions about how to create a permitting system that is not a restriction, but takes into account like some type of scientific analysis where applicants would be required to submit permeability coefficients for their patios and then monitor them over time. And we as a commission decided that although scientifically that might end up being a little bit more robust, it's going to create a lot of confusion for the members of the public, for the applicants, and for the representatives having to do the work. And it's going to create a huge burden on staff having to go out and check those things. So theoretically, I agree with you. I think that some type of standards rather than a full prohibition is probably better from a scientific perspective. But from a regulatory standpoint, at the time, we felt that it just is easier to do the restriction. And I know that's probably not what a lot of people want to hear, but again, I think we should get these regulations passed, and then if it seems to be a burden or it seems to not work out, as I said before, we can always change this later. So thank you.
Thank you, Seth. And Katie, thank you for your the letter that you sent to the Conservation Commission, and would you like to speak on that?
Sure, thank you very much, and you're welcome. My name is Katie Barnacle. I'm a wetland scientist with ILEX Environmental, and my comments were submitted in the spirit of being a consultant that's worked on the island for over 30 years. I don't own property, so I don't have any skin in that game. But when I read the regulations, sometimes I struggle with understanding what certain things meant. So that letter that I submitted, it's a 3-page letter I submitted yesterday. One is on the definition of isolated vegetated wetlands. And I was a bit confused because it mentions minimum wetland size of 500 square feet. And I know a lot of other towns, their bylaws have adopted a minimum size of 500 square feet that a commission would take jurisdiction over. But yet this definition mentions the 500 square feet, but it also includes performance standards for area isolated vegetated wetlands under 500 square feet. So I really was confused of, are you taking jurisdiction over everything? And there's just different performance standards if you're above 500 square feet or below 500 square feet, or if anything under 500 square feet is not jurisdictional. And if that's the case, and you don't intend on taking jurisdiction over anything isolated vegetated wetland under 500 square feet, then those performance standards should go away. Also, I did a search of both the bylaw and the regulations, and nowhere are the terms isolated vegetated wetland used or minimum wetland size. So when you have a definition that uses those terms, usually they're referred to somewhere in the regulations. And this wasn't supposed to be a rude comment, but when I read it again, I thought that was kind of snarky of me. But I wrote, in other words, don't define words or phrases that are not used in the regulations. So I'm just hoping that there's some more clarification of what this means. I'm not arguing whether or not there's jurisdiction. It's just clarifying what your new definition of isolated vegetated wetland means. So people like myself, when we read these new regulations, if this is adopted, understand just what this means. And I've read these over and over and over, and honestly, I don't understand what they mean. So that could just be my problem. But if I'm the only one, if I'm having this trouble, then I think other people might have that trouble. And I did make a suggestion of maybe a simple sentence that could be added to section 390-18 for vegetated wetlands, stating a vegetated wetland subject to these regulations may be bordering or isolated. Isolated wetland shall meet the minimum standards as per the definitions. Just some simple text. That's all I was suggesting. The second is concerns using the McFirm, the Massachusetts Coastal Flood Risk Model. And I know I sent in a huge letter before, and I know that SCS, the company SCS, sent another comment letter regarding that. And basically, there's an evolution of the predicted sea level rise models that we are to use, not only for the bylaw, but also for the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act and Chapter 91 for tidelands projects. And all I'm asking at this time, that instead of you using the word we shall utilize the McFirm, that we may utilize the McFirm, because there's some studies out there, and I know Mass DOT has some concerns of using the McFirm, which they paid for, to have this developed. And I don't want to go into all those issues again. They were outlined in both those comment letters, which I do refer to in yesterday's comment letter. And I'm just asking if you just change the shall to may. And as this evolves, this predicted sea level rise modeling, perhaps that is something that, as Seth was saying, that in the future, every year that this gets revisited to see what models are out there, to see what the latest modeling that's more accurate. My concern is that if we have to use the McFirm, there is a level of conservativeness built into that. So someone may not choose to do a climate change project because of the cost, because of the design, the conservative design that comes out of the McFirm model compared to like the NOAA model. So again, just if you could just switch one word from shall to may utilize the McFirm. On the buffer zones, I have no objection to increasing the buffer zones. I don't think that's in my purview to comment on. I love the graphic, and as that graphic evolves, I think that's really critical to provide to people and make sure it's on the website. So I was really happy to see that. And this might be my confusion, but section 390-26 that talks about the buffer zone. I think Jeff mentioned that that is not changing because that's specific to other projects like restoration or invasive species. So I think that answered that question. So you might need to ignore my comments. But there was a phrase saying outstanding resource area, and I couldn't find the definition of outstanding resource area anywhere. So just a recommendation that either it's this, this go around of regulation revisions, or in a year that you revisit that, maybe keep that as what the definition of an outstanding resource area is. And also the Massachusetts prohibited species plant list, I think Jeff addressed that. So I'm happy with that. I probably was looking at an outdated version of the regulations. So I do appreciate you taking my comments in the spirit of a consultant trying to, work through the regulations and understanding them. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I believe we changed the model.
Yes, thank you, Katie. And I don't know if Jeff, you'd like to reply first, or?
I'll actually turn the MCFRM question over to Will.
Okay.
And then you can have it back. But if everybody remembers when I made a confusing interjection at our last wetlands reg update meeting about MCFRM, it was because one of my very intelligent coworkers, Leah Hill, had noted that we needed to fix that. So those updates have all been made. There's still a reference to MCFRM in the land subject to coastal storm flowage performance standard, but it now reads, when permitting new projects, risk determination shall utilize the latest available data from Nantucket's NOAA tide gauge, the latest sea level rise projections, and the Massachusetts coastal flood risk model. So we're leaving it broad, whatever the latest sea level rise projections are, that's what's being recommended, but the only place that MCFRM is still in there is there. Jeff?
Thank you.
So on the minimum wetland size, this is something that we've talked about a lot for the last few years, not as a commission, but at staff level too. And currently, like I said earlier, there's no minimum size. So if you meet the criteria for a vegetated wetland and it's the size of a nickel, it in theory is within jurisdiction. I know that sounds ridiculous. It's kind of an over exaggeration, but we've seen areas that people have wanted to be wetlands that are as small as, I feel like some of the smallest ones are even like 40 or 50 square feet that, you see some of that stuff in. And it's really trying to address those situations and create kind of a minimum size, but also I think the concept behind what was put forward was to still provide the function of that area while providing, again, flexibility for folks to deal with those small isolated areas on their site. We talked with town council quite a bit about where to place it in there. And again, I know town council was 100% comfortable with where that information sits currently in the regulations. I mean, they reviewed that section multiple times. They actually reviewed that text separately of it being inserted once before, and then reviewed it again once it was put into the definition section. So I think we're comfortable with where it is. I know it's not a concept you see a lot of other spots, but also some of our size restrictions here in size and space aren't as common as, they're more common here than other spots in Mass. So I think it was kind of our first attempt to say we need to have a minimum size just to let people understand and plan around it. But what that minimum size ends up being over time, I think, maybe kind of under evaluation. But again, I think our goal when we were asked to put this together was to be able to say, if it's important enough that it's jurisdictional now, how do we create flexibility where, an area that's small, maybe the size of the little desk complex that's here, doesn't completely disrupt an area unnecessarily when we have the ability to work with that area. So I think that's what we are trying to do.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Will. Yes, please do.
I tend to agree, having dealt with the zoning code for 41 years now. If you're using terms, they need to be defined. Was she on the right track when she was talking about the isolated wetlands definition, which we don't have in here, in that whole list that we just added?
No, the minimum wetland size isolated vegetation wetland is solely within the definition section.
Okay, because she's saying that there's quote unquote that is not defined.
Well,
I thought we've
that's
done
the
that.
only spot it's located is within definitions to
Yeah.
define it. And I think that's why we chose to put it there, was to define it.
Yeah, so long as the legal establishment said it was fine.
Yeah.
Thank you, Linda. Okay, so, Good evening.
Good evening, Dan Malloy, Site Design Engineering, I guess last but not least, maybe. We had a few comments. We did file a letter with the commission just with our comments. So just generally speaking, I want it to be known, obviously we're consultants, we're engineers before this commission on a regular basis, presenting applications and projects. And in terms of our comments, what I'm offering, suggestions, to be clear, we're not being paid to be here. So we are consultants, but no one's paying me to be here tonight. So that's a clear point. So some of the comments hearing back and forth and some of the regulation changes without reading what we filed for a letter and some of what I'm hearing tonight, some of the simple things, the discussion about pervious or impervious patios. Perhaps you'd consider a requirement where pervious or impervious surfaces are required to be drained or infiltrated. Something where just an outright restriction, where a comment was made earlier, you may restrict it, and after it's done, someone's going to build it. So why not do something where a patio is allowed, but drainage is required? It's a simple thing. A lot of times you require drainage for roof drains already. So to add an additional component, something could be simple in the lines of impervious surfaces shall be provided drainage facilities on site. It can be very done simply without a restriction. That way you're gaining the infiltration and drainage you're looking for without having something being built illegally afterwards and you're gaining nothing. So I think it's a simple thing. You could look at the wording of that just to tweak it and rephrase it a different way, take the restriction out, but require something else in its place. A couple of the comments we had in here, there's been some changes. So I know there's been some back and forth on the 2-foot groundwater separation that's in the buffer zone to a bordering vegetated wetland. There's been a change in the definition now that it basically says pools are not allowed to get that waiver, but a house is allowed to get a waiver. So our question on that is based on what science or mathematics or engineering is available to say why a pool can't get a waiver, but a house can. Now, I can understand maybe there's concern about pool water infiltrating with the groundwater, but how is a house different? So that's a question I'd like to at least put out there. You're restricting one, allowing a waiver on another, when the whole discussion on the 2-foot groundwater separation has been happening for years and years. There has yet to ever been anything put out in public as a proven science to say why this restriction is even in place, because it's regularly waived by the commission. So rather than constantly waiving it or asking applicants to now do a study, which is in there, which from an engineering standpoint, I'm very confident is going to prove no impact, which you'll then allow it anyways. So why is that requirement still there? And it's only applicable in a bordering vegetated wetland. So that's a question I'd throw out there to consideration, that I think the 2-foot separation rule requires further review, if not complete elimination. We did have comments on the buffer zone expansions, general questions, again, comments. There's been a lot of talk about studies and everything else, but has there been any review or studies on Nantucket? Forgetting about off island, other towns, whatever they do. And I'm not necessarily opposed, as I understand the buffers to protect the wetland resource areas. But what has been reviewed to show that some type of buffer zone expansion provides a benefit? Instead of just a benefit, some meaningful benefit, because obviously everything provides a benefit. But to what extent is it provided? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Linda, I was just going to ask Jeff if he had any comment to, I know you do. I know, well, the science, of course, is used for septic systems, and yeah, Jeff.
So I'll try my best to answer some of those as best I can. Kind of history on the 2-foot separation of groundwater. Again, that was a provision that was added into the regulations, oddly, when I was a consultant, back in the day, kind of in the early 2000s, as a response to some projects where we were seeing some intrusions to groundwater. We've looked and looked for, what was provided to the commission at the time for reasoning on that. And there's really not a lot of information. So I unfortunately don't have a lot of history on that other than being here when it, excuse me, when it went in. We've also looked around quite a bit for, some technical information, and we are asked to do some research. And I know I've talked about this to the commission before, so I don't mind saying it again, for what the impacts to groundwater are from structural intrusions. And most of the information that we've received, either in, talking to, geologists or some structural engineers, is that, residential development typically doesn't have huge impacts to groundwater in general. And obviously you don't want pollutants or things going in kind of long-term or on a basis, but we haven't been able to find a lot of literature that, 100% supports that maybe as well as we should. And I know when we talked about this a couple of years ago, again, I remember having the same talk in the trailer over by our office. I think that's why, kind of dealing with it as an existing performance standard. One, we separated it out from the performance standard it was attached to, just to deal with it a little bit differently and kind of flesh it out a little bit. And I think that's where, through the commission's discussion, providing some sort of analysis of groundwater and how you're going to be impacting it to demonstrate no impact was important. And if I remember correctly, I think the discussion of pools specifically was related to some concern by members of the commission that should a pool leak or have issues, that you would be putting chemically treated water into groundwater. And I know the volume of groundwater is ginormous, for what it's worth. But I believe from, my notes and kind of looking into this and reviewing Mr. Malloy's letter, those were the concerns that were raised when this was drafted.
Thank you. Yes, Linda.
I remembered you and I both sort of knew where this 2-foot thing came from, because I happened to be sitting there right across the hallway when this came up from that particular office. And it has always bothered me that it was, okay, she just picked out 2 feet, there you go. She didn't like a particular project, and now we're gonna have this. So my point was, I can deal with the pool part of it, but my point was, and it was well taken by Dan, that it shouldn't be in there at all, or it should be phrased differently, or it could be suggested or something, other than having it maintain itself. I know you've separated it, but maintain it there at all when it comes to residential. I think every one of these things that's in a wetland or recharge area, anything like that, should come in with maybe it's 3 feet, maybe it's 4 feet, maybe it's 6 inches. I think this 2-foot thing has annoyed me since I was sitting there and listened to why it was vindictively put in. So I'm still having a problem with the fact that it's in here the way it's in here. So I don't know if that's something that we can sort of hold out and you could figure out how to deal with it. But I'm still having a problem with that one section because I know how it got there. And it may be not 2 feet, as I say, it may be something greater or less for
So-
projects.
So would you like to make a motion to, because I'd like to move forward on this if possible?
Yes, I'd
and I
love to
think
have it never again.
we all would like to. So would you like to make a motion to withholding that aspect of this to approve the rest of these regulations?
Yeah, that would be my
Thank
motion.
you. Thank you. Do I hear a second? Thank you. So by roll call vote, Mark Beal?
Will you allow further discussion, Mr. Chair?
I'm sorry?
Will you allow further discussion?
I'm sorry, Seth, I didn't see you again, so please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And Linda, I hear what you're saying, but I think your comments have already been taken into account by the way that the new performance standard is written. So if you remember from before, and I know the history, I know everyone's mad about that, but that's not really the purpose here. You know, the current proposed performance standard says all structures shall maintain an undisturbed 2-foot separation to high groundwater. Should this separation not be possible, a waiver request must include a hydrostatic analysis, and any intrusions into the groundwater shall be required to be non-toxic and demonstrate no adverse impact to groundwater. Pools shall not be eligible for a waiver from this requirement. So that allows the flexibility that you're talking about. It allows for engineers or project representatives who can't meet that 2-foot separation to perform the hydrostatic analysis and show no impacts. I don't see how that is burdensome, or it's what engineers are doing anyway when they're planning out the property and looking at the groundwater on site. And I would say too, I just would like to agree with Jeff about the pool requirement. It was to minimize the potential for untreated or for chemically treated water to go directly into the groundwater should there be a leak or issue with the pool. And I hear what Mr. Malloy is saying. How is it different from a house that has water tanks in it or toilets or whatever? But hopefully, at least if those leak, they're leaking into the house and being dealt with first before they're going directly into the water. So that was the purpose of, that was the opinion of the commission at the time. I would say too, and I've said this before, independent of the history of this performance standard, it is scientifically true and is proven to be a fact that because of sea level rise is not only causing coastal impacts, but is pushing groundwater closer to the surface. So although in the early 2000s, this may have just been made up for who knows why, this is beneficial for coastal resiliency in the future to prevent unanticipated impacts to groundwater in locations of development where the properties are being built close to that groundwater, because the groundwater is rising and having the separation is going to buffer against that rise. So I would like to see this remain in the regulations. If everybody's going to not vote for the regulations, if it's in there, so be it. But I think there's a clear purpose for it being in the regulations, and would like to see it remain. Thank you.
I think, Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, it's the 2-foot arbitrary thing that was thrown out by that individual that didn't have any basis in any fact. As I said earlier, it could be 6 inches on a project. I agree with the pool issue. 6 or 4 feet, it could be actually as much as 4 feet, depending on where these projects are taking place. It was the arbitrary 2-foot thing that has irritated me for the last 15 years when it was put in there. So I'm more concentrating on the arbitrary and capricious way that was done, as opposed to giving the flexibility to us and the staff and requiring what Seth just said to say, well, it's not 2 feet, it's 4 feet. But it says 2 feet, and that's what's irritated me all along. So that's really, I don't, that's why I wanted to hold it, to see if there's another way to phrase it where the 2-foot thing didn't become, that's your standard.
Yes, so I think Seth gave a very good explanation why we should keep it in there. So I wonder if for the purposes of passing these regulations, if you could
Jeff's got his
try
hand
and
up.
let go of your irritation here. And yes, Jeff.
So just some procedural issues before we start voting and raising hands. One, this is a public hearing, so you guys would need to move to close the public hearing before you make your final vote and take that vote. I would say if there's going to be, a point here where, let's just say you guys wanted to have a discussion on that performance standard being removed, someone could certainly, make that motion relative to that single performance standard. I think it'd be better to do that separate, then close the public hearing prior to voting on the whole suite of changes, as opposed to trying just to do one vote with the public hearing still.
No, that was my
technically
point,
being
it's
open.
just this one section, not the whole thing.
No, I understand. Right. So,
I'll keep you on the straight and narrow if you start to straighten.
and
I'll
well,
interrupt you.
you've been doing it for many years. Thank you very much.
I think we were voting on something.
So, yes, Gary.
I think we're in the middle of a vote, though, Mr. Chairman.
Well, do you mind if Mr. Beller speaks first, and then?
I'm a retired lawyer now.
Misunderstood you. So,
I'm still retired, although I am still admitted to practice before the U.S. Supreme Court. But I urge you, don't change the rules now. Seth said you're going to have to change them later on anyway, perhaps, when you see what the experience is. The pool's a very sensitive matter. There's plenty of flexibility in the waiver process. Don't change the rules. You've been working on this for 2.5 years. I just urge you, get it done.
It wasn't related to the pools, Mr. Beller, it was related to the residential part of it, yeah. I'm not a pool person.
Is anyone else? Yes, sir.
I think Paul's up here, too.
Yes, so,
For sake of procedure, I'll withdraw my motion if somebody wants to withdraw their second.
thank you.
Okay, because you can't continue to do this while there's a motion and voting taking
Right,
place.
and I
Okay, so I'll
misunderstood you,
withdraw
I
it.
think. So thank you very much, Linda. And Mr. McCarroll?
No, we
Nope.
just
No,
withdrew
no,
it.
no, we're still discussing things, and I'm going to take a bathroom break in a minute, so go
I'm Martin
ahead.
Carroll. I live at 106 Westchester Street. I'm also a member of the Nantucket Shellfish Association. I sit on the executive board. I do not speak for that organization. However, educationally, the one thing I've learned about this, being on the Shellfish Association, living here, is we live in a harbor. If we have a harbor, we have an island. If we have an island, we have a community. If we don't have a harbor, we're going to have nothing. Pure water, clean water, protecting water resources are critical. All of our water resources are somehow connected to that big body of water that surrounds us. So please pass these regulations. They may not be perfect. I personally think they could be a lot stronger, but they're a step in the right direction. And they're critical, I think, at a time when we've got faced with huge investment in building in this island and climate change that's affecting water levels. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Paul? Thanks.
Business. Thank you for the record, Paul Santos with Nantucket Surveyors. Just one question, and it relates to kind of what Andy had brought up and maybe what Jeff is kind of alluding to on the grandfathering of pre-existing lots. And I'm just wondering, obviously you have 4 criteria for granting waivers, and you're adding one under the new regulations. Would you be comfortable with on a pre-existing or a pre-existing lot that predates the regulations that condition A, which is, would that be able to be the waiver that would be required, or the waiver requirements that we have to meet now? Are you comfortable with the ones we currently have in place would cover that issue that Andy brought up? So I guess if Andy came in with his lot, I'm assuming I'd be filed under A, which is the regulations that, given the existing conditions, the proposed project will not adversely impact, or whether Are you comfortable with that being the provision that would kind of put us there?
I'll answer really in general here,
Yeah.
without it being there.
Right.
So when we put this together, and I'll try to be brief, one of the things that I know I have done and we've talked about quite a bit is we've looked at plans and permits that have gone out before, right? And try to apply the rules to them and say like, how would this have gone, right? So we kind of scenario run it. The short answer is yes. I think all of those, the waivers that currently exist can cover those situations, right? Some of it may take some justification to do. I don't need to think there are any extra. I actually think the one that we'll probably see some increase in is we typically see no adverse impact, no reasonable alternative, or A, as Paul was bringing up in the most. I think one of the other ones as we look at this with the new kind of enhancement mitigation requirement, we might also start seeing what is the fourth one, which is the resource area outside of an area of the applicant's control, where you start to see where buffer zones apply across other houses, where you can't make those contiguous areas. But I feel totally comfortable with proper justification being able to apply those in certain scenarios. Absolutely.
Great. That's all my question was. My one other question would be, is there a consensus from the board on the effective date of the regulations? Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. So, all right. So, should we make a motion to close the hearing? All so moved. A second. Thank you, Tim. By roll call vote.
Wait, can you make sure that was in the microphone that this is just the motion to close the public
This
hearing?
is a motion to close. Okay. So, by roll call vote, Mark Beal.
Aye.
Tim Brain. Seth Engelborg.
Aye.
Mike Mazzarelli. Joe Plandowski. Linda Williams.
Aye.
Ian Golding, aye. And let's take a 2-minute break. Thank you.
It'll take you 2 minutes to get up the aisle.
Shut it out. Okay, so Seth is on, so we call to order. And so we get to the discussion, and Jeff has
Yeah,
a
so-
point to make.
Yep, you guys are in deliberation now. I think from our comments that we've taken in, I think I do have one suggested clarification to make it simple, because we call it out in structure as it is, where we call out that impervious surfaces are structures. I think just to be clear, if we added a sentence at the end that said pervious surfaces are not structures, that would take away that point of confusion that kept coming up. But it still eliminates, I think what we're all concerned with patios in specific is, when they get turned into roofs and they're stone on stone on stone that are
Right.
cemented in place.
Right.
Right, that's what we're trying to avoid, but I think we also want to be clear and encourage things if it's truly pervious, that it's not structural. And I think simply saying pervious surfaces are not structures. So
Does that mean violate patio is then
no,
pervious or impervious?
it is listed because of the way we've defined impervious surface. It would still be in impervious surface because it's primarily stone. Where if you saw something that was, we see like turf pavers and things that are there where, the squares are big, but I think it would be incumbent upon demonstrating that whatever you are proposing was truly pervious to not be structural.
Okay, good. Thank you for that suggestion. So that's adopted by unanimous consent. Excellent. So I thought that we had a sort of consensus that we would have these in effect from the end of the year. But Mike, you feel that that's too short a period?
Just given the volume, I was making that suggestion, just given the speed of government and the volume that may come forward. To us.
Well,
Would be a year from now would be, put us like right back at the appointment process too, right?
It would. I would say, the two dates that have been thrown about, there was the January 1 date that was thrown around last time. Given the fact that it's June 27th, I would say if you're going to go that full year, that July 1st would be the date, just because it's change of fiscal year, change of commissioners, that I would say those are the two dates that we would say would be either January 1 or July 1.
Chairman,
Yes.
I disagree with the one-year period. I support January 1 of 2025.
So could I make just to see how the rest of the board feels about it, make a motion to do it? Are we there, or is that not the process?
So this is including the setbacks, of course.
Correct.
Yeah, and yes, Jeff.
If I may, if that's the motion that Mike wants to put forward, I think he could simply say he's moving to adopt the regulations as amended, effective with the date that he chose, and then you could vote that out. And then if that was defeated, someone could make a similar motion with a different date if they wanted to.
Okay, thank you for that. So Mike, would you?
Yeah, so I would be making the motion to make the regulation with the new setbacks effective on July 1, 2025.
And a second? So by roll call vote, Mark Beal?
And that was January 1, 2025 for just the setback one?
Nope.
No.
The regulations would all go effective on July 1st.
The whole thing, which yes.
No.
Mark Beal, no. Tim Brain?
He's going to call him through.
Tim Brain?
No.
Seth Engelborg?
Abstained.
Seth?
He abstained.
Abstain.
Okay. Mike Mazzarelli?
Aye.
Joe Plandowski?
No.
Linda Williams?
Aye.
Ian Golding, no.
So what are we doing? Making
Well, someone would have to make a motion to adopt the regulations as amended with a different implementation.
I'll make a motion to adopt the motions effective January 1st, 2025. No,
You voted on July 1st.
Oh, no, that's why I asked. Are we voting on January 1st or July 1st? That's what
Oh, that's why I said July.
before we started voting.
Oh, no. So to be clear, this is,
Town meeting all over again.
so to be clear, the motion on the floor that Mark just made is that the regulations are adopted as amended, effective date being January 1st of 2025. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you, Linda. So by roll call vote, Mark Beal?
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry for the confusion. So are we just voting on the date at the moment?
Yes.
Or, okay,
Well,
thank you.
So we're voting to adopt the amended regulations to be effective on January the 1st, 2025.
And then we still have to go back and vote the regulation?
No,
as
this
a whole?
is,
This is
no,
it?
no.
Okay.
This is the whole thing.
This is the whole thing.
Lock, stock, and wetland. Okay. So by roll call vote, Mark Beal?
Aye.
Tim Brain?
Aye.
Seth Engelborg?
Aye.
Mike Mazzarelli?
Opposed?
Joe Pandowski?
Aye.
Linda Williams? Ian Golding, aye. So that is approved by a vote of 6-1. And thank you, everybody.
So
Thank you.
Can I hop in for a second? So
Yes.
obviously, this will have to be advertised through the newspaper. So we'll do that for a couple rounds, and then we'll obviously we'll get everything up on the website, clean as can be, and posted with the effective date on there. And then we'll start to roll that out through outreach as well.
Yeah, yeah. So that brings us on to public meeting, public comment. Any public comments? And/or certificates of compliance, Low Shimo Nominee Trust, 42 Shimo Pond Road.
Phone's off, sorry. These are very old. Quick fun fact, the first one, 741, the NOI was filed 8 days before I was born. August 21st, 1992. So these two have done my site visit. Things are different than they were in the early 90s, but everything is in compliance and everything is where it is supposed to be. Recommending both of these are issued.
Excellent. Thank you. A motion to approve the certificate of compliance. Thank you, Mike. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. By roll call vote, Mark Beal.
Aye.
Tim Brain.
Aye.
Seth Engelborg.
Aye.
Mike Mazzarelli.
Aye.
Joe Pandowski.
Aye.
Linda Williams.
Aye.
Ian Golding, aye. That brings us on to the public hearing, Sconset Bluff Preservation Trust, 41-119 Baxter Road, which has been continued until July the 11th. And so on that note, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Hold on one second, Mr. Chairman. We have our comments. I just wanted to say it's been a pleasure, and anybody who runs and puts themselves out for particularly a regulatory board needs to be commended, and I'll plaudits to you for your 12 years of dedicated and certainly passionate support and efforts. We don't always agree. It doesn't really matter to me whether we do or we don't, but I really do appreciate the time and the effort and your dedication to the Concom, and CRAC in particular as well.
Well, thank you, Linda.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, 12 years, that is remarkable to give that much of your personal time to a regulatory board. So congratulations to you.
Well, thank you, Mike. And I think we all share the same concerns, which is why we're all sitting here. So thank you to all of you for your service.
Well, I'll say in particular too, thank you. And I know chairing is an extra task. You got to tolerate Will and I a lot more than the rest of you guys. So thanks again for your time and service. I know you've probably seen a lot of changes through the years, being one of the longer tenured members that we've had over the last couple decades. So thank you for all your time, energy, and effort. And thanks to everyone for their time, energy, and effort. And we'll see where the future takes us, I guess.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you for your patience and your advice and your knowledge over the years. It's been invaluable for me. So,
I think Will wants to say something too.
Don't forget me.
okay.
I already texted you, but thank you. I'm just gonna super fast because Ashley's over there too. Thank you for shepherding this through the final stage. I think you took the football from previous chair, and
I did indeed.
we have seen a process that has gone on longer than Will's been here, which is Will's happy tonight. Thank you all for.
Like before you were born, Will.
Yeah.
I started high school that year.
Yeah, and I wanted to add also thank you to Ashley. I don't think
Yes.
Ashley had any
Big shout
thoughts
out
that we
to
would actually
Ashley.
get to a vote. Well, thank you for everybody who's working so hard on this, and we'll see how it washes out.
Okay, so by roll call vote, Mark Beal,
Aye.
Tim Brain,
Aye.
Seth Engelborg,
Aye.
Mike Mazzarelli,
Aye.
Joe Plandowski,
Aye.
Linda Williams,
Aye.
Ian Golding, aye. Thank you and good evening, everybody.